The Korean War is often remembered as a conflict defined by frozen hills, shifting front lines, and a frustrating political stalemate. What is less often acknowledged is how unprepared many soldiers were when they first arrived, and how quickly they were forced to adapt. Behind the familiar images of rifles and parkas was a quieter reality. Survival often depended not on issued gear, but on what a soldier could assemble, modify, or improvise with almost nothing. Field kits in Korea were not standardized systems of convenience. They were personal solutions to logistical failure, harsh terrain, and a war fought at the end of a very long supply chain. Understanding how these kits were built tells us far more about the war than any map of troop movements. The Korean War exposed how thin the line was between supply doctrine and lived reality. When United Nations forces entered Korea in 1950, they did so with assumptions shaped by the experiences of World War II. Planners expected defined fronts, established depots, and, predictable resupply. But Korea quickly dismantled those expectations. Roads were primitive, rail lines unreliable, and weather extremes, they were more severe than anyone had anticipated. Units advanced rapidly, then retreated just as fast, often leaving supply echelons several days behind. In this environment, a soldier simply could not rely on the idea that replacement gear or rations would arrive on schedule. What really mattered was what he could carry, conceal, repair, and repurpose on his own. This gap between doctrine and reality forced soldiers to rethink the concept of a field kit. Official issue lists existed, but they were frequently incomplete, inappropriate, or just, simply unavailable. The result was, a culture of adaptation in which soldiers assembled highly personal kits tailored to their immediate conditions rather than to regulation. Field kits began as stripped-down versions of issued equipment, not additions to it. Contrary to popular belief, soldiers did not solve these problems by carrying more. Weight was the enemy, especially in Korea's mountainous terrain. Instead, many stripped their load to essentials and rebuilt from there. Issued packs were often modified, with non-critical items discarded in favour of space for food, socks, or ammunition. Soldiers learned quickly that dry feet mattered more than extra clothing layers, and that, calories mattered more than comfort items. Mess kits were, reduced to just a single cup or can, often repurposed from discarded containers. Cooking gear was kept minimal because, fuel was scarce and fires could be really dangerous. For many soldiers, the ability to heat water, not actually cook meals, became the real priority. This shift influenced later military thinking about individual heating and ration preparation, moving away from those bulky communal solutions towards smaller, more flexible systems. Cold was, honestly, one of the Korean War's defining adversaries. Early in the conflict, a lot of soldiers just didn't have adequate winter gear, and even the stuff issued later often failed under sustained exposure. Field kits evolved to address this, mostly through improvisation rather than official supply. Newspapers, rice sacks, and burlap were layered inside jackets for extra insulation. Gloves were reinforced with cloth strips or even rubber scavenged from vehicle inner tubes. Soldiers learned to waterproof boots with grease oil or wax, not because it made them comfortable, but because frozen feet ended combat effectiveness entirely. These modifications rarely appeared in official manuals, but they spread rapidly through units because they worked. Medical field kits became personal lifelines rather than standardized packs. Official first aid kits were small and limited, designed for immediate trauma rather than prolonged exposure or illness. In Korea, frostbite, infections and exhaustion were as dangerous as enemy fire. Soldiers began augmenting their medical supplies with whatever they could obtain. Extra bandages were cut from shirts. Alcohol, when available, was conserved not for drinking, but for sterilization. Painkillers were hoarded and shared within squads based on trust rather than rank. In a war where resupply was, really uncertain, the ability to repair equipment became way more valuable than just having spares. Field kits often included small sewing kits, bits of wire, and, basic tools scavenged from vehicles or abandoned positions. A torn pack strap or broken boot could actually be mission-ending if it couldn't be fixed right there on the spot. Soldiers learned to cannibalize damaged gear just to keep other items functional. Buttons, buckles and straps were honestly reused over and over again. Rations in Korea were, quite frankly, often monotonous and sometimes just not enough. Soldiers responded by customizing their food-related field kits around preparation rather than content. A single heating method, a reliable container, and the ability to share or trade mattered way more than carrying multiple ration types. Improvised stoves using fuel tablets, gasoline-soaked cloth, or scavenged solid fuels were common, though always used cautiously. What makes Korean War field kits historically important is not just what they contained, but how they came into existence. They were not the result of top-down planning. They emerged from decentralized decision-making at the lowest levels, where soldiers responded to immediate problems with limited resources. This reality challenged traditional military assumptions about control and standardization. It demonstrated that adaptability at the individual level could compensate, at least partially, for institutional shortcomings. Modern military doctrine increasingly acknowledges this, emphasizing initiative, adaptability, and personal responsibility in ways that would have been controversial before Korea. For modern survivalists, these kits offer, a historical counterpoint to the equipment-heavy preparedness culture we see today. Korean War soldiers did not survive because they had perfect gear. They survived because they understood priorities, adapted relentlessly, and accepted that preparation was a process, not just a checklist. The Korean War is often called forgotten, but what is truly overlooked are the everyday decisions that determined whether soldiers endured. Field kits assembled from minimal items reveal a form of warfare defined by constraint, ingenuity, and quiet discipline. They remind us that survival often depends less on technology than on judgment. Understanding these lesser-known aspects of the war deepens our appreciation of those who served and honestly sharpens our own thinking about preparedness under uncertainty. If you value this kind of in-depth historical analysis, consider subscribing to Warfield Survivor and sharing this video with others who believe that history still has practical lessons to teach.